Once upon a time, in a grand and powerful empire called Persia, there lived a young Jewish woman named Esther. She didn't come from a famous family. She didn't have riches. She didn't even have parents. She had been raised by her older cousin Mordecai, a kind and wise man who loved her like his own daughter. Esther was beautiful, but not just in her face. She had a calm, humble spirit that made people feel safe around her. She was gentle, respectful, and thoughtful. No one would have guessed that one day she would change the future of an entire nation. Let me tell you how. The king of Persia, Xerxes, had just removed his queen Vashti from her royal position after she refused to appear at a royal banquet. The king, feeling embarrassed and angry, sent out a decree to find a new queen. Beautiful young women from all over the empire were gathered and brought to the palace. Esther was among them. Now, Esther didn't tell anyone she was a Jew. Mordecai had warned her to keep that part of her identity secret for now. So, quietly and politely, she entered the palace and joined the group of women going through preparations to meet the king. But something about Esther made her stand out. She didn't chase attention. She didn't try to impress. Yet the royal officials began to favor her. They gave her the best food, the best rooms, and the best treatment. When it was her time to meet the king, she didn't dress in flashy clothes or beg for approval. She simply followed wise advice and remained herself. And just like that, King Xerxes fell in love with her. He placed a royal crown on her head and declared her Queen of Persia. Can you imagine that? A young orphan Jewish girl now sitting on the throne beside the most powerful man in the world. But the real story was only just beginning. Now in the king's court, there was a powerful man named Haman. He loved power, and he loved when people bowed to him. Everyone obeyed him, except Mordecai. As a Jew, Mordecai would not bow to any man. He bowed only to God. Haman noticed, and Haman hated it. But he didn't just want to punish Mordecai. His pride burned so hot that he wanted to destroy all the Jews in the empire. So he went to the king and said, "There is a certain group of people who don't follow your laws. They are dangerous. Let's get rid of them." The king agreed. He didn't know Esther was one of them. A law was written. On a certain day, all the Jews in Persia would be attacked and killed. The news spread like wildfire. People screamed. Families wept. Fear filled every Jewish home. Mordecai tore his clothes in grief and went to the palace gates crying loudly. When Esther heard what was happening, she was shocked, but she was also afraid. She was queen, yes, but no one could go to the king without being called, even she. If she entered his court without an invitation, the punishment was death, unless the king chose to spare her. So now Esther had a choice: stay quiet and safe in the palace, or risk her life to speak up. Mordecai sent her a message that shook her soul. He said, "Don't think that just because you're in the palace, you will escape. If you stay silent, help will come from somewhere else. But you and your family may die. Who knows? Maybe you were made queen for such a time as this." Esther felt the weight of those words. She realized she couldn't hide anymore. Her silence would be the death of many. She needed to act. But first, she asked Mordecai to gather all the Jews in the city to fast for 3 days. She and her servants would do the same. She said, "Then I will go to the king, even though it's against the law, and if I perish, I perish." That, right there, was the moment her fear turned into courage. On the 3rd day, dressed in her royal robes, Esther stood outside the king's throne room. Her heart pounded. Her hands trembled. She knew what could happen. But as soon as the king saw her, he smiled. He raised his golden scepter, signaling that she was welcome. Esther lived, but she didn't rush into the problem. She invited the king and Haman to a special banquet, and then another. She waited. She prayed. She chose the right moment. And finally, with courage burning in her voice, Esther spoke. There is someone who wants to destroy me and my people." The king was stunned. "Who would do such a thing?" he asked. Esther pointed across the table. "That man, Haman." The room froze. The king stood in rage and stormed out. Haman fell at Esther's feet, begging. But it was too late. Haman's plan had been exposed. The king ordered Haman to be punished on the very same gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king gave Mordecai a high position in the palace. Esther didn't stop there. She begged the king to reverse the order that allowed the Jews to be attacked. The law itself could not be undone, but a new one was written. The Jews were now allowed to defend themselves. When the day of the attack came, the Jews stood strong and they were protected. From sorrow to celebration, the people rejoiced. They remembered Esther's courage. They honored Mordecai's wisdom. And to this day, Jews celebrate the story of Esther in the festival called Purim. Esther never planned to be a hero. She didn't grow up in a palace. She didn't come from power, but she had something greater: faith, courage, and a heart that cared for her people. She was willing to risk everything, not for fame, not for glory, but to do what was right. Her story teaches us, you don't need to be loud to be strong. You don't need to be known to be chosen. Sometimes, the scariest thing to do is exactly what God needs you to do. And maybe, just maybe, you too were born for such a time as this.